Test? Okay. See, my voice is so loud you thought I was on, didn't you? All right. Well, this part didn't have to be recorded anyway, so. But wow, now I got to catch up. We were traveling with Southern Heights. We sent them on, and it was so good. We had Austin and Amanda Presco with us on our trip with Parkview, and that was something that the elders approved to happen, and we got to take them with us, and it was fantastic because Austin could go on. There's only room for one of our adult leaders by the time to get all of our kids there in time. And so Austin went on with them, and everything worked out really good. But I did want to express this to you because Austin and Amanda said, please thank Parkview for us. And Amanda kind of put it down in words. So I do want to express this, but also express from our kids. Every time we would eat a meal, get back in, that type of thing, they would all say, thank you. And they just did great on the trip. Just everything overall. So I want to read this to you. It says, Parkview, thank you. We want to thank you so much for the opportunity to spend a week with your youth group and get to know them. They were such an inspiration for us during a difficult time. Our trip was very last minute, and you guys allowed that to happen. You have a very loving and trusting group and are open to accepting to everyone, which says great things about the leaders and congregation they are surrounded by. We love you guys and just want to thank you again for the opportunity to join your group this past week. And Jeremiah 29:11, and you might write that down and look that up. But I personally want to thank everybody for the support through the year, the extra support that was given, that gave us even enough padding that when there were some difficulties and it took a little bit of extra funds, the funds were there. And it was a wonderful experience, I think, for all of us. The CIY people did a fantastic job, as usual, on their end. And so just wanted to share that with you. It's interesting when you're listening to speakers all week long. And you hear various things, and you're leading small groups. You have passages that you're looking up, thought questions that you're asking, and a lot going through your mind and thinking, what am I going to share when I get back home? And I mean, there was absolutely so much together with our group, and in combining groups for the small group times, we actually split up the two youth groups from Southern Heights and our youth groups and meshed them in together and split them up for small groups. And we'd have our personal youth group time of a night. And between all of that, all the lessons, all the things that I heard, guys, I get as much out of it as any of these kids do. I was really struggling on the way home on what is it that I'm going to say. And it's amazing how God works. You remember a couple weeks ago me preaching about forgiveness and forgetting, and using Peter as that example. I mean, through the week, the whole week was talking about Peter and those experiences. I was thinking, well, I can't just preach that again. And it's interesting how God does that tying all these things in together, even for these students that went to CIY, and all that meshing in together with some of the things we've been looking at. Been studying Acts in teen class here, and that coming in. There was a few times, Anthony looked down the row and go, like that, because it was covering exactly what we had talked about in class and some of that. So it's just fantastic. But I thought, well, how am I don't want to preach the same thing as I preached 2 weeks ago, or just cover the same scriptures. And actually, it was either Amanda or Austin as we were coming out of Tulsa last night, and we were getting ready to get on the turnpike, and I'd been thinking when we weren't talking, we talked nearly the whole way. But when we weren't talking, I'd be thinking, okay, what passages can I pull off of? What do I want to share? There's so much. There's no way I could share CIY. I just can't do it. There's too much to do in just a little bit of time. And so I've been working this over in my mind, and Amanda says, what are you preaching on tomorrow? And Austin and I had the conversation a little bit earlier on, and I told him, I said, you know what, I have no idea what I'm going to preach tomorrow. But I said, I know that by the time tomorrow morning gets there, I will know. When Amanda asked that question, we were just passing a sign. The sign said, and I know a lot, if you've been to Tulsa and you're headed this way, and I think it's on this end headed that way too, the sign says speed limit, 75 miles an hour. Right underneath that, strictly enforced. That's an interesting sign to me. I've seen it many times. Strictly enforced. That they would put that on the sign, strictly enforced. And as we're passing the sign, which I'd already thought about before, because every time I see it, I think, oh, that's kind of interesting. She asked me that question. I started to say, I have no idea. And there was a sign, and I said, I'm preaching on strictly enforced. And it was exactly, because as we traveled on then, and of course by this time, we're starting to all get tired, and so it gets a little quieter, and I have the chance to be thinking about some of the passages that I want to share with you this morning. Why would they have to put strictly enforced on that sign? I mean, wouldn't we know that? I mean, that's the speed limit. That's the limit that they have set, and they're going to enforce it strictly, which means what? If you go over that speed limit, you can expect to get what? A speeding ticket, pulled over, a speeding ticket, or at least a warning, right? At least a warning. But if it's strictly enforced, you can pretty much expect that if you're going over 75 miles an hour, they stop you, they're going to give you a ticket. But it's interesting, as you drive down through there, you kind of get lulled into this idea that it's not strictly enforced. Here's everybody else zooming around you. You're going 75 miles an hour, and it's just going right by, and you don't see a highway patrol anywhere, and you go for miles and miles and miles, and you're waiting to get to those golden arches that go across the road so you can stop and use the bathroom, and no highway patrols. And you begin to think it's not strictly enforced until all of a sudden, boom, there's those lights. You see them up there. They've got somebody pulled over. You see, the thing is with the highway patrol, they can't be everywhere all the time. I mean, they can only be where they're at. And so if they're not there and everybody's going flying past you, they can't do anything about that because they're not right there. But when they are there, they're going to stop you because it is strictly enforced. Is God's law strictly enforced? I mean, if we look back at the law of Moses, you look back at some of the passages that are back there. Turn to Exodus 21. There's a lot of passages I could have picked from that we could look at with this. And I just pulled a few of these out. Verse 15. I'm just picking one. There's a lot of laws. He who strikes his father or mother shall surely be put to death. Does that sound strict? That's pretty strict. I'll stay back here. No? Okay. He who kidnaps a man, whether he sells him or he is found in his possession, shall surely be put to death. That's strict. And I mean, you can read on through these. Don't do it right now. Take some time if you want to read those a little bit. But we see the strictness. I mean, if you look at Deuteronomy, just flip over a little bit. One of those books you read through and you think, well, why do I need to read all of these laws? We learn things about sin. We learn things about salvation by learning about sin and the things that are written in the Old Testament scriptures. I mean, that's something that Paul said to Timothy. You have learned about salvation through the study of the scriptures that you have known from childhood up. Is that me, John? Oh, okay. In Deuteronomy, in chapter 21, it says in verse 18, teens, I didn't pick this one out necessarily for a reason. If any man has a stubborn, rebellious son who will not obey his father or his mother, and when they chastise him, he will not even listen to them, then his father and mother shall seize him, bring him out to the elders of the city at the gateway of his hometown. They shall say to the elders of his city, this son of ours is stubborn and rebellious. He will not obey us. He is a glutton and a drunkard. Then all the men of his city shall stone him to death. So you shall remove the evil from your midst, and all Israel will hear of it and fear. Sound strict? What are you squirming for, Tucker? No, he was laughing over here. Denise is shaking her head, yes. It's pretty harsh. This is God's strictness. So we're traveling along on this path, and we kind of get lulled into this idea that God isn't so strict. How do we arrive at that? How many people here feel forgiven? Raise your hand if you feel forgiven. Why do you feel forgiven? Jesus Christ. And we know we have forgiveness. I mean, we have passages in the New Testament that describe this forgiveness to us. But let's not be lulled into the idea that, okay, Jesus is there, and that's really what Romans 6 was talking about when he says, shall we sin so that grace may abound? God forbid. And so he gives them this description of why we shouldn't do that. Because we get into this idea, well, we're just cruising down the road here. Everybody else is zooming past, and so we can zoom too. And we still feel forgiven. The strictness of God didn't go away. Let me at least introduce the idea of that in the fact that he was so strict about it, he killed his own son. He's the one that delivered him into their hands. Peter says in Acts chapter 2, when he's describing it, I mean, listen to this. Men of Israel, verse 22, listen to these words. Jesus the Nazarene, a man attested to you by God, with miracles and wonders and signs which God performed through him in your midst. Just as you yourselves know, this man, delivered over by the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God, you nailed to a cross by the hands of godless men and put him to death. But God raised him up again, putting an end to the agony of death, since it was impossible for him to be held in its power. He goes on to quote David and look at the prophecy of him not decaying and staying in the grave. But this man, delivered over by the predetermined plan and foreknowledge of God. God is so strict about sin that Jesus himself, when he's hanging on the cross, comes to the point he's still being in control. Though they have been the ones who have driven the nails, they have been the ones who have raised him up there to a point he can't breathe. He can only get so many words out. The blood is pouring. And he says, it is finished. It's done. And he dies. That's how strict God is. Why is he so strict? Because he loves us. How many parents have said that to their kids? Right? Is that right, Margaret? Generation after generation after generation, parents have said that to their kids. If you want to know why I'm being so strict on you, it's because I love you. He loves us. He wants the best for us. So we need not think, because there's two possibilities. If we get lulled into this idea, okay, I'm forgiven, and so the rest doesn't matter. Because it's really easy if you're traveling down the highway and everybody else is passing, or somebody passes and they get right in front of you, a big truck, passes, gets right in front of you, you're going downhill, the wind's, catching you right there, and you just let her go. All of a sudden you're going 80. Anybody else ever done that? And before you know it, and you go, whoa, wait a minute, and you back off. But it's too late. You were already going 80. If he would have been sitting there, you'd have got it, right? And that's what happens to us at times. We're coasting along. We're doing good. Something else around us is happening, and just so easy just to let it go. And it doesn't matter if we say, whoa. Sometimes it's just a thought. Sometimes it's an action. Sometimes it's words coming out of our mouth. And it's too late. We all understand that because we all sin and fall short of the glory of God. We cannot deny it. If we deny it, 1 John chapter 1, we are liars. And so we're sinning again. And we make God out to be a liar. So there's two possibilities. Because we know we sin. We know there are times we feel that lull, as if, well, nobody's enforcing this. Hebrews, no, don't want to go that one first. Let's go to Romans 11 first. Let's just cut, I think, two more places that we're going. God gives some analogy, and he's talking to people that have really been struggling with Jew and Gentile. The idea of those chosen people of God who have been for ages to come, from the time of Abraham and the promises made to him. Those who were Gentiles that were not of that lineage, not of that nation, that received that protection from God, that have become Christians, and both of them have become Christians, and there's this struggle that is going on with this early church. What kind of things do we as Jewish Christians bind upon those that are not? Some of them honestly trying to consider those points, and some of them just doing it because they think it's the right thing to do, not much that much thought in it. Others holding back and saying, no, we can't put this on them. I mean, there's discussion in Acts that they all get together in Jerusalem and talk about it. What is right? What should we do? Seeking the Holy Spirit's leading in it. All this going on, and when you read Romans, you just see it pouring out of it. I mean, this situation that they're dealing with. In verse 11, Romans chapter 11, he says, I say then, they did not stumble so as to fall, did they? May it never be. But by their transgression, salvation has come to the Gentiles to make them jealous. Now, if their transgression is riches for the world and their failure is riches for the Gentiles, how much more will their fulfillment be? Talking about the Jews. But I am speaking to you who are Gentiles, inasmuch then as I am an apostle of Gentiles, I magnify my ministry. If somehow I might move to jealousy my fellow countrymen, the Jews that is, and save some of them. For if their rejection is the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? There were Jews who wouldn't accept and absolutely furious that this message was going to Gentiles. And he's saying, what I'm doing with this is the hopes that there will be those that are moved to jealousy that will respond to this message of Christ because they see what God is doing in the Gentile people. If the first piece, in verse 16, if the first piece of dough is holy, the lump is also, and if the root is holy, the branches are too. But if some of the branches were broken off, and you being a wild olive were grafted in among them, and became partaker with them of the rich root of the olive tree. Stop there for a minute. Get the analogy. You've got an olive tree. It's the natural one. And some branches were cut off. You have the Israelite people, the Jewish nation as it is. Because of their unbelief, branches cut off. They wouldn't believe in Jesus. They would not accept Jesus. They were cut off of that protection of God as a people. He says, but you were grafted in. And so if the natural ones can be cut off, and you as Gentile people can be grafted into the family of God, can be grafted into this protection of God. Then he says, verse 18, do not be arrogant toward the branches. But if you are arrogant, remember that it is not you who supports the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off so that I might be grafted in. Quite right. They were broken off for their unbelief. But you stand by your faith. Do not be conceited, but fear. For if God did not spare the natural branches, he will not spare you either. Behold then the kindness and the severity, might say strictness, of God. To those who fell, severity, but to you, God's kindness, if you continue in his kindness. Otherwise, you also will be cut off. Guys, this idea that you say, I believe in God, I believe in Jesus Christ, I want to accept him. You're baptized into Christ, and then you don't live for him anymore whatsoever, is not what this passage is teaching, because that's not belief in him. That's not trusting in him. If we trust in him, we're going to live for him. We're going to live the way that he tells us to live, the design that God has for us in life. These people were cut off. The natural ones were cut off so that we could be grafted in. And he says if the natural ones can be cut off, he can cut you off too. That is the kindness and the severity of God. He wants you on the tree. But let's not be lulled into the idea that God's not strict. He's forgiving me. I can go ahead and do this. I'll ask forgiveness later. Okay, that's one possibility. Hebrews chapter 12. First part of the chapter, and we've read it recently in here, is the idea of fixing our focus on Jesus, keeping it there. Running this race with endurance, setting aside the sin that so easily entangles us. I don't know what that is. Not for you. Setting aside the sin that so easily entangles us, keeping our eyes on Jesus, focused on that. He says in verse 4, you have not resisted to the point of shedding blood in your striving against sin, and you have forgotten the exhortation which is addressed to you as sons. My son, do not regard lightly the discipline of the Lord, nor faint when you are reproved by him. For those Whom the Lord loves, he disciplines, and he scourges every son whom he receives. That's the quotation. Then he says, it is for discipline that you endure. God deals with you as with sons. For what son is there whom his father does not discipline? But if you are without discipline, of which all have become partakers, then you are illegitimate children and not sons. Furthermore, we had earthly fathers to discipline us, and we respected them. Shall we not much rather be subject to the Father of spirits and live? For they disciplined us for a short time as seemed best to them, but he disciplines us for our good, so that we may share his holiness. All discipline for the moment seems not to be joyful, but sorrowful. Yet to those who have been trained by it, afterwards it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness. Maybe we should be thankful that a 75-mile-an-hour speed limit is strictly enforced. And if we get a ticket because we're going over that, it possibly may have saved our lives or somebody else's. Because the line of that road is 75 miles an hour, not more. For whatever things are taken into account, amount of traffic and design of the road itself, all of those things. Maybe we should be extremely grateful when we are disciplined by God. One, first of all, recognizing that you're a child of his. That we recognize that if something that we read in the Word of God stings, if we feel guilty, if we are exposed and ashamed before our brothers and sisters in Christ, how does he discipline you? You're probably aware of that. But it's something we should be thankful for. He loves us enough to discipline us. That discipline, when we respond to it, makes us the children that he desires us to be. Why is he so strict? Because he loves you. If we won't yield to that discipline, what did he tell the Israelites to do? Take him away. Take him out of your number. Cut off the branch. It's something God does. Strict? Strictly enforced? Praise team wants to come up? Yes. But the strictness is there because he loves us and he wants relationship with us. If it's not there, there's no way we could have that fellowship. The strictness is exhibited beyond any other exhibition of the strictness of God in the death of Jesus Christ. Don't forget that. That's how strict he is. I didn't want this to end so sober. But everybody looks pretty sober right now. We have something to rejoice in. If God disciplines us, we have something to rejoice in because it means